The legacy of the so called founder of the New World, Christopher Columbus, is being challenged in the island nations of Trinidad and Tobago. As the pioneer of the modern European empire, Columbus was the first European to arrive at the islands. Trinidad and Tobago have been debating the removal of the three ships Columbus used to sail to the islands from their coat of arms, in a step towards banishing colonial vestiges. Since the formation of the island nation in 1962, this is the first time changes to its coat of arms have been seriously debated. Columbus is celebrated in mainstream historical narratives as a noble hero and master navigator spearheading the age of exploration. But who was Columbus really, and what is his link to Trinidad and Tobago? Columbus received financial support for his voyages by the Spanish Empire under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Widely regarded as an expert maritime navigator, Columbus arrived at the islands in 1498 on his three ships Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Marion as a part of his third voyage. He is said to have named the islands Trinidad and Tobago after the three peaks at its southeast corner and a local type of tobacco pipe, respectively. After the discovery of the islands by Columbus, Spanish, Dutch, and French colonists arrived at the islands, first in search of gold and then to build sugar and cocoa plantations. Sugar remained the backbone of the colonial economy throughout the 19th century. Cocoa overtook sugar as the colony's leading export crop by about 1900. Oil found in the southern half of Trinidad became the colony's most important source of revenue by the 1930s. Britain acquired control from Dutch, French, and Spanish colonial presence in the island in the 19th century. After the formal abolition of slavery, the British brought in indentured labor from India to work at the plantations. The discovery of the islands by Columbus thus set up the framework for the colonization of the region through large-scale exploitation of its people and extraction of resources. The movement for the removal of Columbus's ships is part of a larger wave of change which questions the championing of colonial legacies. In 2015, the social movement #Rhodes_Must_Fall began at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Cecil Rhodes was a colonialist who drove the movement for the conquest of Zimbabwe and Zambia, named Rhodesia after Rhodes in the late 19th century. Rhodes was a firm believer in the superiority of the white race. He was committed to the exploitation of Africa in the pursuit of this ideology. His statue in South Africa was defaced in 2015, while another statue in Oxford was desecrated with human feces. Debate over the legacies of imperial figures such as Rhodes reached an unprecedented level of public scrutiny during the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020. In France, the statue of celebrated abolitionist Victor Scholler was attacked, and in the UK, the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was toppled into the Bristol harbour. Other figures which came into question included King Leopold of Belgium for his brutal colonization of the Congo, and Captain Cook for his treatment of Indigenous people in New Zealand and Australia. The memory and symbology behind statues and monuments with links to colonial exploits of France and Britain were criticized and debated during this movement. So, what exactly do colonial monuments express when situated in public spaces? Shared lived social spaces where these statues are placed are shaped by the presence of these monuments. The men elevated by these statues functions as commemoration of the past and celebration of values which the statues embody. Artistic devices such as the choice of the material and the construction of the monument highlight these values. These statues have power. They wield the power of memory and they embody, express, and perpetuate power relations. Let's examine the statues of one of these great men, Columbus, to illustrate this better. This is a statue of Christopher Columbus in the port of Spain, Trinidad, one of two in the country. The presence of the statue in the square is important for the founding myths of the country which celebrate Columbus's so-called discovery of the islands. The structure of the monument grants Columbus a premium view of the city, as he is perched on top of the granite base. The granite base also includes the Trinidad and Tobago coat of arms, another homage to Columbus's legacy with references to the naming of the islands and his symbols of power, like the ships. The monument shows Columbus looking over the space proudly. He is adorned in robes befitting royalty, holding a cross in one hand. His maritime genius and conquering spirit is rewarded with the grandeur of the monument. There are Columbus statues littered throughout the world, with 149 statues in the United States alone. The statues commemorate Columbus's status as the founding father of the New World and the pioneer of empires. That is, until the ripples caused by the death of George Floyd. The statue of Columbus in Trinidad and Tobago was defaced by protesters in 2020, at the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement. Protesters wrapped the statue in red paint and tape, with murder and danger painted on it. Even as the horrors of Spanish colonialism in the Americas, such as the brutal treatment of the indigenous population, became known in Spain and Europe at large, the reputation of Christopher Columbus as discoverer was immune to contestation. When debating the legacy of a figure like Columbus, it is important to consider who is remembered and why and how they are represented. Commentators argue against the removal of imperial statues, saying they are part of history, and stating that their removal would be silencing or rewriting history. On the other hand, critics argue these statues and monuments themselves are rewriting history, as they portray men like Cook and Leopold as heroic, by glazing over these men's involvement in violence against indigenous people and the conquest and extraction of land and resources. By occupying civic space, monuments of these men legitimize narratives of conquest and dispossession, arguably colonizing minds in the same way white settlers seized vast tracts of territory. The removal of statues is important for serious considerations of reparative justice. Reparative justice refers to measures which seek to repair in some way the harm done to victims as a result of human rights violations committed against them, according to the International Center for Transitional Justice. Simply put, reparations are retributions and compensations which colonists owe to the formerly colonized and exploited. The removal of imperial statues of men who have been part of this legacy is a step towards acknowledging the harm caused to victims. Monuments which exist in public space, such as the statue of Columbus, reflect the commemoration of history and memory through the sacralization of these figures. The advent of the Black Lives Matter movement, one of several movements of the colonized world reckoning with the legacy of colonialism, reflects an undeniable shift in global debates surrounding the acquisition of justice. As attitudes about imperial figures change, the performance of monuments in public space must also adapt accordingly. Columbus, master navigator, conqueror, and all-around great hero, may not be remembered and celebrated as fondly in Trinidad and Tobago or in children's books as he once was.